And here's a person, he's not approaching the car, he's just standing there. Was that a test? What could I have said? Oh, they buy cheap liquor with it. They'll buy beer or wine or whatever. I don't need to give them any money. Have you ever done that? Do you know what they're going to do with that money? You don't know, do you? You suspect, or you hope to suspect, or you've got an agenda already working in your mind. And so since I had a couple of dollars just lying loose in the console of the car, I put down my window. And it used to be you had to roll down the window, which was an extra reason not to bother. But now you just push a button. And you don't even have to hold the button down. You know that? Most driver's doors have automatic windows, right? You just touch the button, it goes all the way down. Handed the man the $2. Was that a test? I don't know. And you don't know either, if that was a test. And then, of course, there's the final test, right? The time when you and I face God face to face in eternity. When you and I come upon that time when we know that the end of this life is near and a new adventure is on the doorstep. Then is what you think and what you've said and what you believe a test? My experience is most of us think it is. And then the last response, the one that bothers me the most. Judas said, "What does this have to do with real life?" And some of you are very pragmatic. Some of us. Because in every circumstances, each one of us gets it. What does this have to do with real life? You know all this generosity stuff? All this peace and justice kind of stuff? All this turn the other cheek, pray for your enemies? What does this have to do with real life? Whether Jesus said it or not. That one's pretty painful, I think. Real life. Because we are told in Scripture, and it tries to capture us, that Jesus lived it, this real life. And that Jesus was this real life. And Jesus said that this, what he was showing us, was a picture of God. This was the real picture of God. In fact, he said, this is the only real life. I've been reading this book, Social Intelligence, which is written by a psychologist and a neuroscientist. And I think I've said to you before, if I was starting out in life in a career all over again, I think I would look into this brain research stuff because it's so fascinating to me. But anyway, when we think about how we act in the world and what is real life, some of the stuff that's coming out of this research to me is fascinating. And a man named Daniel Goleman wrote this book. He also wrote a book, Emotional Intelligence. And if you like this kind of reading, I mean, it's obviously not light reading. It's not like Agatha Christie, but it's really fascinating stuff. Listen to what he says. He's talking about the belief that people are either very difficult always and not to be trusted, or that people have a basic, innate good nature, and that could be relied on. He mentions a Chinese sage by the name of Mencius, who wrote in the 3rd century before the Common Era, 3rd century BC. All men have a mind which cannot bear to see the suffering of others. All people have a mind which cannot bear the suffering of others. What do you think? A lot of suffering around, isn't there? A lot of people looking at it. Neuroscience now supports Mencius's position, adding missing data to the centuries-old debate. When we see someone else in distress, similar circuits reverberate in our brain. The kind of hardwired empathetic resonance that becomes the prelude to compassion. If an infant cries, her parents' brains reverberate in much the same way, which in turn automatically moves them to do something to soothe our baby's distress. Our brain has been preset for kindness. Our brain has been preset for kindness. That's what brain surgery is telling us, among so many other things. And over the next couple of decades, some of the stuff coming out of this neuroscience is going to be amazing to us. But our brains are preset for kindness. Then what happens to us? What happens to us? Are you known by your family and your friends as a really kind person? Have you been described that way? This person is really kind. Well, we know people like that. And so we would hear that phrase and we'd say, yeah, I guess that's true. You know, my Aunt Alice was a person like that. Aunt Alice was a really kind person. Uncle Gene, not so much. And some other people that you know, you wouldn't, that's not really a kind person. That's the word I would use when I think about them. But their brain is hardwired to be kind. So what happens in this world of ours? Because we see so much hatred instead of kindness. And quite frankly, we see so much apathy. How many stories have you heard about people walking away when they should have helped? Or people making up excuses? And there's so much turning away from injustice in our world. So many people are being treated unjustly in the whole world, and we've got our own interests. I used to hate and still hate whenever I hear a politician say, well, you know, we have to consider American interests. Sometimes that makes sense, but many times it's, you know, the heck with these other people. We've got our own interests to deal with. I guess sometimes that's what gets votes. It's hard to live out Jesus' way. Those things that Jesus said, it's hard to live that out. Something happens to us. Now, there are complicated answers to this, to be sure, but the insight from the gospel, I think, really helps, because Jesus plays out how one person's, yours and mine, how one person's agenda can screen out kindness and compassion. The woman comes to him. First of all, we're told he doesn't really want to have any visitors. You know, he's kind of a downtime for him, wants to be beside. Always reminds me, and many times it happens in Scripture. I've had associates in the ministry who come into the office in the morning, close their door, the door is never open, because they don't want to be interrupted. And I was taught in seminary, and by a couple of ministers, old ministers who I really appreciated, who always said most of the ministry is in the interruptions. So if your door is always closed and you don't have any interruptions, you're not really doing your job. And so this is one of those times. Jesus is hoping for this downtime. He's in a private home, it seems, and this woman comes in and says to him, I got something I want to talk to you about. And sometimes the commentators have thought, or preachers have thought, that that was one of the reactions why one of the reasons why Jesus said this hard saying to this woman. I mean, he wasn't on the surface of it. It didn't seem like he was compassionate at all, did he? First, the children must be fed, and why should we throw the food to the dogs? It's a pretty tough kind of a saying, to be sure. This woman, first of all, to understand her, we have to put her in a category that you and I can relate to quickly. First of all, she's an outsider. She's a stranger. And therefore, she's different. And the word different is something you and I can identify with pretty easily. We see different kinds of people. We don't usually like to hang out with different people. We like to hang out with people who are very much like ourselves. And this is why on Sunday morning, and you look around sanctuary after sanctuary after sanctuary, in most churches, everybody looks kind of alike. There's not a lot of differences. We have a little bit of difference in our congregation. Some congregations have no differences. This is one of the reasons why some congregations have a hard time making the changes they need to make.